Witch hunts, just as real today as they were 400 years ago. And after that occultist reading, I was kind of noodling on, why is this energy of somebody trying to stop your forward movement lingering so long? And I thought I might do a curse reading to see like what might be if a practitioner is throwing something your way or it's something more mundane. And my heart sank when I saw these two cards, the Seer and the Witch Hunter. Because, of course, the first thing that came to mind was the Salem witch trials. And so I'm just going to put a blanket trigger warning on this reading just because that's a heavy topic. It brings up heavy topics, and I'm probably going to rant about some things. But when I saw these two cards, like the Seer, that didn't really evoke a ton of feeling in me right away. It was when the Witch Hunter came out, because it was that deflating feeling of like, you too? Like, even you weren't someone I could trust? Like, if you've seen Game of Thrones, I think it's at the end of season 5 or 6. Spoiler alerts. But when Jon Snow gets hit with all those arrows, the most painful one is the kid Ollie. Because, like, he's been poisoned so much by this mob that he turned on Jon Snow, called him a traitor and everything, and really destroyed Jon Snow's view of him altogether. Like, in that moment, you had the option to take his side and you didn't. We all make choices. Um, so let's start getting some cards and see what this witch hunt is about. And something I noticed too about her expression after the second card came out was how worried she looks. Didn't really notice that at first. So let's see. We've got the Necronomicon Tarot here. This is a birthday present to myself. It's really cool. It's the Lovecraftian deck. But what about this witch hunt? And the thing about the witch hunts, the Salem witch trials, that's like the perfect case study for the risks of smear campaigns. And we've had it for 400 years, and we just continue to let women get targeted in various contexts. Like, witch hunts became mental asylums. It became the LGBT community. It was the gays, and then it was the trans community that became the witches. And the torch gets passed throughout the ages, throughout different demographics, but the mechanics remain the same. Which is what is so frustrating about this to me, is because we know how these work. It's just nobody's stopping them. And we've got the Tower, which is sins of the ancestors. Interesting. Fitting. Madness. Those two are in reverse. The Moon. So, lunatic. Luna. Two of Torches. Two of Wands. Preparing for a journey. And the Tower in reverse is similar to the Tower upright. It's just the Tower delayed. But the sins of the ancestors, to me, that's that continuation of witch hunts or anything like it. Because if you put this in the context of a curse, that could be a practitioner doing something to try and make you a target. I don't know if they've got some sort of grudge against you for like a perceived or actual wrong. I'm feeling more perceived wrong with the Moon card here, Madness. I feel like this is going to be seen, though, that this is like conspiratorial. Because the witch hunts, Oh, and I did want to mention there's a really good episode of boring history. It's like history to sleep to, like bedtime stories on YouTube. Um, why the Salem witch trials were worse than you thought. It's a really good episode, and it gets into the deeper layers of the not sanitized version of the witch trials, in that it was a land grab. You know, the women that they were going after were not witches. They were women who did not adhere to traditional gender norms, women who had successful businesses, women who had land. It was tearing them down and forcing them to conform, comply with puritanical expectations. And if you don't, you die. And there's such layered manipulation in that, like who was it? The Putnams. They had long standing land disputes with somebody who was executed during the trials, like property disputes. And it's all these things that, like, if you just look around, if you just look at the context and, like, take the blinders off, you'd see that, like, this is a farce. They're using religious hysteria to eliminate their personal enemies. And we see it time and time again in this us versus them rhetoric. But when you label somebody a witch, that them category then has the extra component of being evil. They're not just different, they're evil. And so you get that, like, mass hysteria stirring up. But the Two of Wands, this is like preparing for a journey. So that's where I'm getting that conspiratorial sense from, that this is intentional. Somebody's trying to stop your forward movements and make it look like you're this villain or something, but really it's a personal grudge that they have against you. Maybe for something that they did. You know, if I had $1 for every time I've been called crazy for reacting to something somebody did to me, I would have much less financial problems. And it's amazing how quickly they develop amnesia for things that happened like moments prior. Oh, what else do we got here? So on the left, how is this going to be seen? How will this madness be seen? Because I don't know if you can see in the reflection. There's like faces in the water. Beneath the moon, secrets revealed. Oh, and it kind of looks like little feathers, little leaves. If you remember in The Lion King, in the older, before they edited it versions, there were like all these weird little Easter eggs in the older Disney movies. And when Simba like flopped down on a little hill or something and all the leaves flew out into the wind, it spelled out sex. And they're all like, the Little Mermaid had one on the cover. Like, I used to have that on Laserdisc. But it reminds me of that. Like a hidden message. Somebody who's doing something because they can, or they think they can, and they're not getting caught right away. So how is this going to be seen? And this is the Witching Hour Oracle. How is this going to be seen? Is that the wrong question? Nope. It's taking the bottom one, which I think was upside down. Actually, looks like Cinderella. Oh, the Witching Hour. Favorable circumstances. but it's in reverse. So unfavorable circumstances are bringing things to the surface. What were the other two? Familiar and invocations. An animal in words. And she's got the wolf or the fox in there. I kind of want one of these. So what about the witching hour? What's not favorable? These are a little harder for my tiny little hands to shuffle. And this is the Lunar Nomad Oracle. What is not favorable? I'm going with that one. Man. Man is not favorable in the witch trials. Okay, yeah. Doing something not favorable? I don't quite understand. A man is doing something unfavorable or is caught in unfavorable circumstances. At like the perfect time? Maybe? As the clock chimes. So what about this man, these unfavorable circumstances? Because the witching hour is when the veil is thinnest. Generally, as my alarm goes off for breakfast. But 3 a.m. is when your cortisol spikes. So if you struggle with things like PTSD and whatnot, you probably wake up at about like 3 a.m. or that like 2 to 4 a.m. pocket. And we've got 10 of Swords, 10 of Books in reverse here. And this is my favorite tarot card, the 10 of Swords. Only way from rock bottom is up, and now I have all the swords. Except in reverse, I don't know if you're getting up from that one. That's pretty bad. I feel like that's like being ground down into the ground even further. But I'm almost getting the sense like creating unfavorable circumstances, kind of like the witch trials, starting the leaning on the pressure that they put on especially the first 3 victims. It was the beggar, the widow, and the slave. 2 Sarahs, and her name started with a T. But the slave, she came from a different place. So she had different traditions, folk magic, things like that. And the young girls got curious, and they're living in like a Puritan society, not going to have any type of skill when it comes to emotional regulation, even a safe space to explore other cultures. Absolutely not. So then they cover for their actions with a lie that spirals out of control. Which the person in power capitalizes on. Like that mass hysteria. Because the judges, the court members, whatever, would already know of pre-existing tensions in the community. Like justice just abdicated this whole place when everything went down, because that would immediately get questioned, like, wait, you're labeling someone a witch that you just had a property dispute with like a year ago. But because there were no checks and balances and it was in this little isolated, insulated community, they just got to run amok and take advantage of these unfavorable circumstances that were created by the culture, by the insulation, and so forth. So are you in a situation that mimics that insulation? Like, if you're not dealing with a practitioner that is actually trying to curse you, are you dealing with someone who is trying to create the same outcomes as a curse? Like social isolation, ill-favored outcomes, bad finances, losing your business, things like that. Because you can take these things magically, mundanely, or both. I think the only place where or both is an issue is legislature. But outside of that, you do you. What else about this 10 of books? So this will be seen. Somebody taking advantage of unfavorable circumstances. What do we have here? Knight of Beakers, Knight of Cups in reverse. Four of Beakers in reverse, and Three of Beakers in reverse. All cups, and all in reverse. Oh. And this is an interesting Four of Cups. Like he's huffing this, whatever it is. And I just realized I might be really zoomed in. Am I? Yeah. Adjustment. I always forget when I do coffee readings about my breakfast alarm. So he's huffing this beaker, and his eyes are glowing green. Because it's normally the apathy card can be a missed opportunity card. Trying to become something you're not? Like this big scary monster? Like somebody who's in control of the situation, like beating their chest or something. Like, rah, 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 I'm a big strong man. I can take advantage of vulnerable people. Rah. That makes you feel like a big strong man. Hate to break it to you, but you're a pathetic piece of shit. Pardon my language. And the Knight of Beakers, that's like someone who's pretending to be in touch with their emotions. Someone who acts like they have this cup of love for people. To create a farce. Because that'd be like the, oh, I'm just so worried. I'm worried about them. I'm worried about the community. We don't want these evil witches abound. And it reminds me of the, I just saw the news that Britney Spears, she got a DUI. And people are already talking about conservatorships and this, that, and the other. Didn't Justin Timberlake get a DUI like a year ago? How come nobody's talking about conservatorships for him? He put people's lives at risk. How come we're not putting a leash on him? How come we're not putting a muzzle on him? Is it because he's not a woman? Is it because he doesn't have something diagnosed? Because just because somebody is running amok without a diagnosis doesn't mean they don't have a diagnosis. They might. And the people who benefit from social perception more often than not are men, not women. The Three of Beakers in reverse. I'm kind of getting like a horrified sense. You know, like it'd be the sense of like, oh, when Britney Spears finally put out her book, like actually seeing behind the scenes, seeing what she was put through, then nobody believed her. And probably, I mean, how many people still don't? You know, it boggles my mind how difficult it is for people to conceptualize that being abused makes you crazy. Like, it really does something to you. It fundamentally changes the way your brain works. And then the people who get abused are the ones that get pathologized, assessed, they get pilled, they get put in psychiatric facilities, conservatorships and whatnot. What about the people doing the abusing? When are they going to get evaluated on a meaningful scale? Because they're the ones in charge. By and large, they're the ones in leadership positions. They're the ones that get attracted to that. We're seeing it with, what's her bucket? The DHS secretary that just got fired. And don't get me wrong, she is an absolute nightmare of a person that harms people, harms animals, that should not be in charge of anyone or anything ever. And she should not be getting Joan of Arc'd. Because it's just these repeating patterns of women get up there and do the dirty work, and then we get burnt at the stake. And she's still a terrible person. To be clear. You don't see this kind of stuff happening to men. At least not on the grand scale that it happens to women. Not to say there are not male survivors and male victims, because there absolutely are. But on the right here, so the unfavorable timing being taken advantage of, that's going to be seen. Then what? What happens next? Oh, not quite. What happens after this is seen? Because what I'd like to see is freedom from this cycle, which is the hope after the eclipse cycle that it's loosening up these bonds, these chains. The spell is cast. Let go. Maybe it needs to play out. And this looks like could be a self-love working. You know, I've said before, I only cast on myself. I don't do love spells. Self-love spells being the exception to that. Because everybody could use a little bit more of that. And that could even look like something like glamour magic. But instead of doing cosmetics, you do skincare. Like, just depends. Cooking a meal. That can be a self-love spell. Tell me more of this spell. definitely feels more favorable. Tiny hands. Really would like one to flip. There we go. Birds. Messengers. And none of them are actually in the cages. See? They're all outside this little, like, porthole. Almost looks like a globe. But I feel like that's doubling up on this meaning, the let go, and birds, card 12, so 3, 30. So repeating there. What's that Nelly Furtado song? I'm Like a Bird? It's a good song. So let go. So getting out of the cage, but they're still in view. So I feel like there's something keeping you anchored to this situation. What is it? Maybe you just literally have to wait for it to play out. 8 of Torches. 8 of Wands. Motion, movement. And you can see the, like, the dust being kicked up behind the car. It's a lot of power, a lot of energy. Is that ZZ Top album? It's reminding me of the cover art for that. Sharp Dressed Man is on that one. Can't remember what it's called. So waiting for motion to occur, which is frustrating as all get out. What's the holdup? Why? Why? What are we waiting on, this motion? Or, like, what's the blockade? Because I feel like this has been going on for a while. Queen of Beakers. Queen of Cups. She looks possessed. It was in reverse. So this is that pretending to... Oh. Like pretending to have positive emotions and like being empathetic and things like that. But what I'm getting from this progression of the Knight of Beakers to the Queen of Beakers, both in reverse, is that whomever this man represents, the witch hunter, they're deepening into their madness. That... I don't know if I really want to use the word psychosis, because they know what they're doing. But there's some sort of like... the effort it's taking to maintain these two worlds is becoming taxing. And so it's taking more effort going deeper into the illusion. And which means things are going to become more obvious. It's like when she released her book. Some illusions got shattered. Like things that were seemingly erratic suddenly got contextualized. And it is the worst case scenario for anybody doing anything abusive, manipulative, anything like that, for context to come to light. Because then your crazy person, your witch, doesn't look so crazy anymore. And then the illusion starts to shatter. But they've got to make their potions and their mad science and their everything to to try and keep this up. Because I don't think... Well, his eyes kind of look like they're missing. Hers are white. But she doesn't even look like she's having a great revelation. She just looks kind of possessed. Like someone isn't even doing this anymore, like as an active process. They're doing it, you know, they're like consumed by hatred or something, like that mob mentality where it interferes with reason, but they're still living in reality. They're still capable of understanding and comprehending reality. They're just caught up in the mob mentality. I'm sure there's deeper, like, psychological explanations for that. But 8 of beakers, and it's sideways. So in motion, attempting to leave. This is you trying to let it go, you trying to move on, which might be making this person crazy. Because that does something to the illusion. Like if you don't get named a witch and they don't get to, you know, take possession of your property, whatever that fits into the metaphor of your situation, like you have to be named guilty in order for this illusion to be maintained. And things are starting to get out of hand in order to keep that up. And I'm being drawn to the dice roll I did. Leo, Uranus, and 3rd house. More chimes. Which I'm taking that as like emphasis on something. Interesting combination though, Uranus and Leo. Flamboyant revolutionary. Or like big inflammatory energy around like something revolutionary. And by revolutionary I mean taking a turn, because that's really what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean like a movement, you know, something like that. It's just things were one way and now they're not because we've taken a turn. And 3rd house is Gemini, so communication. I think learning styles too. People might be learning things through some sort of communication. Because in the witch hunts, there would have been like town halls and deliberation and what do we do about the devil's work, you know? And really, it was a calculated, like, how do we target this person that pissed me off, or this person that has a better business than me, and whatnot. And I mean, just the premise alone of like, if you name someone a witch and they get found guilty, you get their property. Conflict of interest much? Like, and aren't they supposed to be Puritans? Isn't that like a affront to God? Accusing someone so that you can get what they own, like coveting thy neighbor's something or other. I think it was their wife, but in the 42 Negative Confessions of Mayet in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they mention specifically property. Like you're not stealing land or property from your neighbor. It's a little more thorough. So it's like that idea of, you know, at the pearly gates, that is what you're going to have to face. That you named your neighbor, like love thy neighbor, you named your neighbor an evil witch to get what they have. No pearly gates for you. That's not how you get in. And the whole idea of unconditional forgiveness, that's not every single sect, at least in my experience. Like, people who are subject to reason aren't just going to give like a free pass, like, oh, you can do whatever you want without repenting. And repenting means doing something meaningful, not just like, I'm sorry. That's not, that's not repenting. Told you I was going to rant. But so, trying to leave, trying to let things go. How do we break through this wall? The wall of the witch trial. This illusion that this witch hunter is casting, this curse. There we go. That seems like the question. How do we break the curse? Oh, geez. The hanging bones, seeing the signs, and dance, freedom, but they're in reverse. And 10 and 20, so a half, halves. It's almost like staying in the situation frees you. Now, use your discernment. I don't want you staying in a situation that you don't have to be in longer than is necessary. But it's like not running from it shows that like you are standing your ground, that you are not what they say you are. And I mean, what a twist. You know, somebody starts a witch hunt about you, and witch hunts traditionally do not execute witches, and then they find an actual witch. Right? Like, what a twist. But seeing the signs, it's like not internalizing the gossip, not internalizing whatever's being said to paint whatever picture suits their narrative, because this is a strategy. It doesn't say anything about you as a person as to how someone is strategizing against you to get their way. This is all about them. And they're a bully POS. Loser behavior. That's one thing I've never really understood about bullies. Like, you go pick on the smallest person in the lunchroom to get your milk money from them, and that's what makes you feel good about yourself? Like, come on. We can all see you. That's like feeling good about yourself because you can step on an ant. Like, oh, congratulations. You're a terrible person. Hooray. And then they turn around and boast about it. They brag about it. Like, we can all see you. And that's usually what they want. They want the attention. And then you'll have the enabler parent swoop in, or like whomever's in that role, of the, like, my child can do no wrong and whatnot, and then they rescue them from their consequences, which were the lesson they needed to learn. They needed to learn that bullying is wrong through consequence, not through, like, don't do that again. Because that's how you get headlines day after day, multiple headlines, of judges that are lenient on ex-boyfriends, ex-husbands, or whatnot, and then you'll see these crazy headlines like, judge cuts a break to man who has history of violence and then leaves courtroom and murders girlfriend. Who could have seen that coming? I don't know. Is it any of the women that are killed every 10 minutes by a partner or family member across the globe? Like my readings tend to be like an hour-ish long, which means 6 women die every time I do a tarot reading. Who's doing something about that? Is it the men in charge? The protectors? The providers? Nope. There's study after study showing that the people who risk their lives to save others are more often than not women. The bystanders that step in are women. We're the protectors. We're the providers. And we deserve to be regarded as such. Rant. I'm just going to cut this. Because of my tiny hands. Heart. Bees. I like bees. As long as we have a respectful distance from one another. Keeping in touch with your heart. You know, bullying sucks. I don't know if you can tell by how upset I'm getting by it. But I've been through this in multiple contexts. My first bullies were my parents. And then it went on to friends and partners, and I've experienced it at work. And it's just, there's this continual cycle of the people who determine the norm, determine the socially acceptable, are deeply, deeply dysfunctional. The problem is they have the power. It's not that they're right. It's not that they have the moral high ground. They have the power to control others, to control others' outcomes. And there's insufficient checks and balances for the vulnerable, for us to stand up to that. And I really don't know what the solution is. Because I have to call into question a lot of people's actions that could then be held accountable for what they've done. Namely, just the abject failure that psychiatry can be to women. And I've just found that specifically to be in psychiatry, because therapists, on the other hand, they have like that time and the emotional depth to go deeper into the issue and like dissect the layers, but they're not the ones doing the diagnosing. They're not the ones doing the prescribing. There's too much separation there. Because I don't think, like in at least the setups that I've been in, the person doing the diagnosing should be the therapist. And then, like, I don't know, the psychiatrist checks their work, because it's a therapist that I'm spending, an hour a week with, and then I see a psychiatrist once every 3 months, once every 6 months, depending on how things are going. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. It's just an inefficient model. 9 of Books. Yeah, it's a nightmare. And chaos in reverse. So order. Order from nightmares. You might have to dig into your nightmares a bit more if you're comfortable with that. Dream recollection can be very difficult. If you're on any type of medication that interferes with your dream or remembering your dream, like my nightmares now get wiped out by my medication, but it also takes my dreams, which I feel like is kind of cut me off from, that cryptic symbolism that I used to use to interpret messages and communicate with my own psyche and whatnot, try and understand what's going on in my internal world. But it's a muscle like anything else. So you can set an intention before going to sleep that you will remember your dreams. Might not work every time, but you start to kind of plant the seeds, till the field to create that environment to remember your dreams so that it's even possible. That's kind of the beginnings of the sleep hygiene that can help you get to your nightmares, get to your dreams, because your psyche might be trying to tell you something that you can't quite get to in waking life. Six of Pentacles. And I like that this is like a hand embrace. This kind of reminds me of those, it's usually like four arms of different ethnicities and like everybody's locked in step. And that's what it reminds me of, which I like better than it being actual pentacles. Because it looks like a vegetation creature and a zombie. So they're different but working together, seeing past differences. Which, if somebody has started a witch hunt about you, I wouldn't count on seeing on that bridge being gapped by them. There might be other people in this orbit who will see past the veil, see past the illusion. Like, as if they read Britney Spears' book. Some people will change their mind and some people won't. Some people are going to double down and be like, oh, well, here's a full tome of evidence as to why she's crazy. And not why, oh my God, we should be listening to people who are opening up about trauma because they're giving us the answers. They're giving us the mechanics. They're giving us the techniques. This is how these things go unnoticed. This is how people get away with it. But the problem with that is that kind of logic really rests on my eternal optimism of people in power want to help. And that's not always true. Sometimes they just want to maintain power. Sometimes they're just out for themselves. Look how many strongly worded tweets we have about things going on by elected officials, and then nothing actually happens. We have actionable things going on, like people likely perjuring themselves. There still needs to be investigations after things like that, but just plain as day, we can see these things happening. We can see, death investigations being interfered with, evidence not being handled properly, and there's so much just cooking in the orbit. This would be kind of the perfect time for a witch hunt because everybody's kind of destabilized right now, and in order to manipulate people, well, not in order to, but it's a lot easier to manipulate people if their foundations are destabilized. I mentioned that my first bullies were my parents. That home environment was extremely unstable, but to the outside world, I was the problem. We always pointed the finger at me because I was the scapegoat. And I was the everything, too, because I was an only child, isolated from any family outside of the home. And everything, all the perceptions and such, were controlled by two emotionally immature, deeply dysfunctional people that happened to bring me into the world. They weren't especially skilled. They didn't have some sort of moral high ground. They were two people that slept together in the 80s, and when you got pregnant, you got married. It's just the way it was. Those are not the foundations for a stable home, though. And, I went through being called a Satanist and a terrorist by one of my parents. And this was just a year after 9/11, when the other parent had been in DC. So I have one parent spewing satanic panic at me because I'm exploring my own faith practice, exploring my own inner world and whatnot. going through my goth phase. And you have the other parent who was firsthand seeing a terrorist attack and then absolutely did not deal with their alcohol problems. I had to shoulder that later for them. It was pretty bad, but it was all me. My behavioral issues. I'm stubborn, I'm difficult, I'm this, I'm that, the other. And yes, I've gone through a lot of therapy. I've gotten down to the roots of a lot of these things, but it's never going to change what they put me through. And I know a lot of spiritualists and people in the mental health sphere will kind of look down on that, on like you're not letting things go and whatnot. Like, no, I've moved on. It's just I'm not going to forgive and forget what was taken from me, like what was done, because I had a right to a childhood. I was entitled to a childhood, and that was taken from me by two emotionally immature people who did not deal with their stuff by the time I arrived on the scene. I get to be mad about that. Just like you or anybody else around you gets to be angry about a witch hunt. Anything of that sort of ilk that you've been put through. If you've been named the proverbial scapegoat, the evil witch, and then when things come out, when the truth is revealed and whatnot, you have every right to just give the finger to anybody who changes their mind. Because when there wasn't evidence, you took their side. You went along face value with what this person said about me. I don't owe you another chance. I don't owe you anything. Nothing. No kind of grace. No forgiveness. Go talk to a priest. You know? If you want forgiveness, like, talk to somebody else besides the subject, the avatar of your vitriol. And we've got Give Your Pet a Treat. Always good. And Aerials by System of a Down. And that's interesting. That music video, that kid looked really different, but he was like the subject of all the attention, all the celebrating and whatnot. But the Give Your Pet a Treat, you know, maybe some time with your furry friend to cool off a little bit, you know, because the anger is valid. It's important to hold space for that. It's important to step away from that space as well. You don't want to let it completely consume you, because I saw a quote or something recently. It said the difference between an emotionally or a regulated nervous system and a non-regulated nervous system is you can hold space for things like anger, disappointment, guilt, frustration, all these things that people are like, fear, we don't know her. Shame, we don't know her. Those are emotions. Those are your body, your mind giving you important information that if you just blow that off, how's that helpful? Like, emotional repression is not maturity. That's not actually dealing with your emotions. I know these things hurt. I know these things are really, really difficult to deal with, but you gotta feel it to heal it. As cliche as it sounds, that really is the beginning of the path to starting to put some salve on these wounds of things nobody should ever have to go through. But overall, I hope this helps. I hope it doesn't resonate, but if you're going through it, I hope you're okay, and we'll see you next time.